My name is Jason Unruhe, and for the past 10 years, I've been doing news from a Marxist perspective on YouTube. And during that time, I've amassed over 3,000 videos trying to explain to the world daily and current events through the lens of a Marxist view. I've also authored 15 books, mostly on Marxism and discussing Marxist theory in general or Marxist analysis. I run a fairly successful blog. I'm also a part-time political commentator for Press TV. The reason I forward the theory of Marx is that it gives us the best understanding of the world and why it is the way it is. It doesn't make excuses for the way things are. It actually explains the process of how we got here. Not just how we are, but the process to getting to this point. Marxist theories about the development of history shine a great deal of light on how societies have been formed over 1,000 years or so. And this gives us the power to not just understand how societies are formed or how they evolve, but gives us the ability to go beyond merely being affected by these blind forces. We now understand how societies are created. And using this knowledge, we can now deliberately create a new society rather than merely being subject to its forces. What Marxism as a science allows us to do is to deliberately create our own future, and that is something we have not had in the past. Well, my path to socialism is probably a very typical one. When I left high school, I entered into the working world with the conception that is given to everybody, that this is the greatest country in the world. You have nothing to complain about. If you just work hard, you'll get whatever it is that you want. Well, several years of having worked in the real world showed that to be completely untrue. While I was working hard, the capitalist was taking all the rewards from it. So basically, the illusion of capitalism was torn away from me by being inundated with the real world. I had to experience it for myself. And the realization of the facade that capitalism puts up motivated me to look for another reason for why this is, to find an explanation. And it was at that time that I stumbled upon the writings of Marx. And then once I began to read it, it made sense in explaining why things are the way they are. And I eventually came to the conclusion that he had the right analysis about societies. And this opened my eyes to about not just why things are the way they are, but how they can potentially be. Now, a lot of different people's ideas about socialism vary. Some have very utopian views of what it is, and some have a much more scientific analysis. What we understand to be socialism is the elimination of the private accumulation of capital, meaning someone cannot merely hoard money to wield that over other people by using that to purchase the means of production or by hoarding and other functions by the market. What it means is to eliminate that class of individual which wields power over the workers. It is to give the workers or the proletariat the power themselves to direct the society, as opposed to allowing a specific class of individuals, the capitalist class, to direct society. I think it's definitely possible that we can reach socialism. It is not an absolute given. The point of socialism is that it's something that we have to create, that we have to put forward the effort to build. It's not something that will just, it's not a boat that will just row itself to shore, as Stalin said, but something that we have to sit down and plan, something that we have to figure out how to develop. That's the point of Marxist analysis, or the Marxist view of the world, is understanding how to deliberately create that force. And we have seen successful examples in the past that give us a glimpse into the process and what it is that we need to do to build that. In a manner of speaking, no, it cannot be reached democratically, because there are forces opposed to it among the ruling class, known as the bourgeoisie, that wield a great deal of democratic power, and they will stand in the way of creating that better world in order to satisfy their own selfish needs, to satisfy their own power, and to protect their own power within that society. A democratic process cannot be implemented to create that. One system must invariably destroy another in order for the new world to exist. Tribal society did not come to an end until someone was able to produce more than they needed, and the fight over who owned the surplus production is what eventually broke down the actual society. And then the creation of feudalism required a class of knights to force people to work on land, making essentially the peasants tied to that very land. It required acts of violence by people who wanted what we call bourgeois democracy, capitalism, to violently overthrow the feudal order. And the coming socialist order is no different. It too will require a destruction of the old world and a creation of a new one. This cannot be done democratically because the standing society has the power to prevent it from existing. Well, of course, in capitalism, the more education you have, the more marketable of a skill that you have. The higher your level of education, the less people there are that have it, and thus by market forces would make it possible for you to have a higher wage. But this does not necessarily justify the wage itself. Just because someone's highly educated at something does not mean that the skill that they have is actually worth that. There are many questions as to what good does a CEO actually do the world? Well, he gets a lot of money to make money for that company, but does that actually benefit the world? Does that actually benefit people? In fact, it actually does the opposite. It causes a great deal of destruction. Rather than simply focusing on whether or not someone has an education and the automatic assumption that the more money you get for it, the more correct it is, but rather educating people in a way that helps society instead. Now, it has not been an easy task to be a YouTuber. I relatively thought it was going to be easy. The main thing is that it's grown to something much bigger than I had ever anticipated it to be. I thought it was just going to be a one-off hobby thing, not something that would lead to, the dedication of 10 years of my life, something that would lead me to having significant influence inside the Marxist community, to lead to the point of gaining a spot on an international television station. Being a YouTuber has caused a great deal of devastation to my life. It's the problem has been that there's a lot of people who will hate you for what you say. This is by no means limited to simply myself. This is something that a lot of people actually do go through. For merely disagreeing with certain sections of the population, I've had people threaten to kill me. People send harassing, threatening phone calls to myself. To members of my family. I've had one particular group of, frankly, other Marxists threatened to murder my family because they didn't like me personally. And it's a very disgusting example of humanity. With YouTube, there's always an unending amount of drama that comes out as a result of just the nature of the platform and discussing with other people. I mean, it's one of those things that shows that, freedom is always chaotic because there's always the freedom for things to happen. But I would say, despite all the negatives that have happened to me in the entire time that I've been there, it has still worked out in the end to be a benefit for me. It depends on how you see it. Today, it's almost impossible to build yourself up to a significant amount of views. Given the way that the YouTube algorithm works, back when I started around 2009, it was much easier for smaller channels to get views from people on the recommended for you algorithm that's created. Today, that goes entirely to corporate-owned products or things that are so large they simply cannot be ignored. So it was easier back then to be a YouTuber. Today, it's a much more difficult task to build up to that level. So it's a quite different situation today than it was when I started. I can't say for certain what would happen in the future because I don't have any plans to do so, but the opportunities may present themselves to me to go into other forms of media, but I don't foresee them right now. But I'm certainly open to something taking place in the future. I really don't think so, because the opinion that I hold is one that's very counter to the mainstream narrative, one that's only going to be allowed to be broadcast in certain media circles that will allow a counter-mainstream kind of view. So unless I tremendously sell out and just become a complete tool, I will not break into the mainstream media and be potentially, have access to, other media networks or which I could broadcast opinion. That's the problem with being a dissenting voice, is that you tend not to be broadcast because you're dissenting against the mainstream narrative. I think it can help the education process. I mean, any way to get the ideas, or, they say the sugar to help the medicine go down would be beneficial. But in the end, this can't take the place of actual real study. You have to sit down and read and investigate ideas. I mean, it's great for getting the initial points in, maybe even getting people interested. It's great in that regards, but the problem with Marxism is it is very unlike capitalism, where it cannot be done superficially. It requires a deep, great deal of investigation in order for it to work. Well, freedom of speech is always a very difficult issue. Nobody really believes in a totality of free speech because everybody will believe in censoring something. Everybody would pretty much agree with censoring child pornography, for example. I'm sure there's some lunatic fringe that would really like that to be free, but nobody really agrees with all speech being made allowed. The difference is, what does a society consider to be right? What is considered to be wrong? Capitalist society censors Marxist speech, Marxist opinion, because it goes counter to what it is that the system wants to achieve. The same thing is true in the opposite. In a socialist country, someone going around agitating for market reforms is something that is a negative because it's detrimental to the system itself. The difference is that socialism can argue against these ideas. It can defeat them in debate and discussion. Capitalism can't really do that. Mostly it has to resort to censorship, mockery, and forms of discussion like that, which really shows the ideological weakness of capitalism. I sincerely doubt that will ever be the case because given the nature of this, it's not a paying job. It's not something that I could find that people wanted to do on... They're not willing to put out enough effort in this situation. It requires too much dedication without pay that it's not something you can expect other people to do or something that they could want to do. I did have other people doing this with me at the time, but eventually both of them just fell away as they were trying to deal with events that took place in their own life. I mean, this is something that is uniquely done by me because I am willing to put the amount of work and effort into it to the detriment of other things in my life. Something that I don't see other people being willing to do to the degree that I have. I suppose I could allow that. The problem is that there's easily going to be a conflict of views, and then it becomes an argument over what I will see as acceptable for it and what I won't. There's very few times somebody has really put forward something that I didn't have some kind of disagreement with on one level or another. It's something that could be done, but it really requires a lot of investigation beforehand. Well, the Marxist community is in the state that it's in due to the fact that it's first worldist. Now, the reason I say that is because there's, as a Maoist third worldist, we believe that revolution must come from the third world, that the first world is overprivileged, and this overprivileged situation breaks the class consciousness that people have. And as a result, because that class consciousness is broken, even among Marxists in the first world themselves, they tend to very often abstract away from class and end up going into things like identity politics, postmodernism, racialism, rather than focusing on what it is that Marxism is meant to be, which is class. And the confusion over these other, to put in the way, bastardizations of Marxism are lead to the confusions among issues that wouldn't even normally be addressed or would not be addressed at this point. The point right now is to build the means necessary to carry out a revolution, to agitate towards having revolution, but first world people are so insist upon having arguments over sexuality, gender orientation, race, that they're completely missing the task that needs to be done right now. And the reason they can do that is because of the privileged position that they hold in the first world. There is no immediate serious economic need for revolution because of the privileged position the first world has. Thus, their minds become filled with arguing about all these other things that are not even necessarily connected to Marxism themselves. And that is to say, the first world is not revolutionary. In fact, it's not even interested in revolution. First world Marxists are more interested in a call-out culture or sabotaging other people's efforts rather than actually building a socialist base for revolution. Well, my channel is primarily aimed at the first world community to at least agitate, some teachings of Marx, to get a Marxist view out to the public, even if it is just in the first world. Educating these masses of people is still a good idea. It's still necessary. Even if first world people are inherently, not revolutionary, it's still important to get the knowledge out to them. One of the goals of third worldism is to reach those very few sections of the first world masses that are revolutionary. These individuals, collectively they're not, but there are individuals that are willing to be dedicated. And the point is to reach those individuals so that they can help the struggles of third world people. I have no real plan as to how long I'm going to keep doing this. I'm probably just going to keep doing it for however long I want to. Because I've been doing this for 10 years, it's a huge part of who I am. It's made up. 10 years is a significant portion of someone's life. Even if you assume an average of an 80-year lifespan, that's still 1/8 of it, and that's pretty big. That's something that you carry with you for the rest of your life. That kind of dedication for that amount of time. I have no foreseeable plans of ever stopping doing this, but you never know what the future holds.